everything's ready and set up. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to part 3 of our What Makes a Great UI Sound series with John Cleworth at Sonic Minds. As you can see, we here on the little slide here, we have this guide for how to ask questions. So we really want to encourage you all to ask as many questions as you can. We will be doing a Q&A session at the end of this webinar, where we will get to everything. So please don't hesitate. You simply open the little chat here, where you can also just write to us as you've been doing. And if you hit the little plus icon next to your chat message, you can change that to a question. You can also access the questions by going up to the top right corner. You see this little bubble, speech bubble. If you click on that, I believe there you'll be able to see questions, vote on them, and see which have been answered and so on. Yes, well, with that, I hand it over to you, John.
Awesome, thanks, Anton, and hi everyone. Nice to see you all here on this new platform we have. So welcome to part 3 of 3 in the webinar series, What Makes a Great UI Sound? Cool. So that had no meaning whatsoever, except to say hello. It's kind of like a Sonic hello and welcome. We're going to be talking about sound today, so we might as well start by listening to sound, right? Why not? Yes, I'm John Cleworth, UX UI specialist at Sonic Minds. I'm also a sound designer. I created that funny little sound you just heard and created lots of sounds you're going to hear throughout this webinar. I'm also going to make some funny sounds with my mouth. So make sure to watch out for those odd sounds. So it should be fun. But let's dive in. So this is part 3 of 3. We had part 1, part 2, and now part 3, where we're kind of wrapping up what makes a great UI sound. So on the agenda, just real quick, we're going to start with a recap, actually, for those who weren't there, but also for those who were at the previous webinars. It's just nice to kind of remember what it was we were talking about, right? So that we can wrap up correctly. Then we're going to talk about UI sounds in user journeys. Very exciting. We're going to talk about sounds that fit together as a family, one cohesive family, which is very crucial. We'll talk about implementing sounds into product. We'll talk about testing the sounds at the end, and then a little bit of the near future of UI sounds, what's to come, the new frontier, so to say. So quick recap. In webinar part 1, it was all about improving usability. It was all about functionality. So improving usability of your products via UI sounds, so that the sounds are intuitively understood, right? So I introduced some tools like the one you can see in front of you here. This tool is one of the few where you can map out your own sounds and functions on this spectrum. So from highly informative and functional sounds on the left, like a fire alarm, if you did have a fire alarm in your product. I assume you don't, but anyway, here's a good example for you. All the way to, you can map out all your functions or sounds in your product across this spectrum according to how, informative versus how atmospheric or informative, so to say. So why we map out these is so that we can kind of assess which sounds need to be purely informative, and therefore that tells us how the sound should sound. So for example, a fire alarm, of course, it shouldn't be so branded. It shouldn't be a premium luxury fire alarm. It should just be a fire alarm that everybody understands. And that tells us a lot when we go into the designing phase. Whereas on the right of the spectrum, things like power on or background music are things that they're less essential in regards to functionality of a product, but they have an emotional function, right? They set moods and atmosphere, and they really hone in that kind of branded, explorative, emotional aspect of an experience. Then we talked about functional sounds being a little like puzzle pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. So each function or each sound is like one puzzle piece. But puzzle pieces need to be fitted together with other puzzle pieces, right? At least in the jigsaw puzzles I've done. So in UI sounds, this means that they need to logically relate to one another and fit together. So as each of these pieces are added, it starts to form one bigger picture, right? In a puzzle, it starts to form one holistic, one unified image rather than many individual images. We don't think of the individual pieces. So the same principle here applies to UI sounds. So how do we fit those puzzle pieces together? Well, we look for counterparts in sound. And what I mean by that is, for example, up, a sound that has upward contour. That's typically used for positive interaction. So da-da, going upwards. But then the opposite of that, downwards, is typically used for negative. And the reason is when we have these clear counterparts or clear opposites in sound, it kind of makes it easy for us to distinguish between the two, right? So it's much more intuitive for us to understand the difference between the two, which just makes it easy to understand, right? Improves the functionality. Another example could be opening sounds. So wah, opening up, and then closing sounds, right? So that can perhaps opening could represent starting a process, wah, going through a door, whatever it might be. That's your creativity to think of. Or closing sounds could be ending the process, right? So again, there's these two opposites, counterparts that we can pull together and utilize to improve our functionality. So what was that? Well, let's go through it. So to make sounds that are intuitively understood, we actually want to piggyback on sounds that are already understood around us in day-to-day life, right? So for example, knocking on a door. If I do this, don't know if you hear it, or if I go dum dum dum, bang on your door, I'll get your attention, right? So that's a symbol we can pull into our UI sound design and actually utilize. It's an easy way for us to grab attention, say a notification sound, right? There we go. So you can just kind of utilize these symbols of communication around us. Another classic one is crumbling paper. Don't have paper here, but if I were to crumble it, it would have that nice satisfying sound, right? But that typically symbolizes throwing something away or deleting a file. So then we talked about in part 2 of the webinar series. Now we're moving to the part 2. So part 1 was the functional, but then we talked about the emotional stuff in part 2 of the webinar. So how can we convey brand identity, right, through our sounds? Because UI sounds, they do two things. They're functional, they serve or communicate meaning, serve a function, and they're emotional, right? Sound and music is extremely emotional and impactful. So that's where you can really convey your brand at the same time in parallel with just one short UI sound. So what we did is we broke down sound, literally sound and music, into its 5 components, which is melody, da-da-da-da, the singable part, rhythm, the timing of when things happen, harmony is the chords beneath or the things that give it emotional foundation. That's what makes stuff happy or sad or nostalgic or whatever emotion it might be. Talked about dynamics, so variation in loudness, intensity, and finally timbre. And why we talked about timbre is because timbre is the difference of the instrument you hear. So the difference between if a guitar and a singer sung or played the same thing, the difference is in the timbre, the texture of the instrument, right? And this 5th component, timbre, is the component that you bend and adjust and push and pull and go crazy with to convey your unique brand identity. It's the timbre that you change. Is it a synthesizer? It is a guitar. What timbre are you going to choose? That really conveys brand. So then we talked about universalities in sound. And this is super interesting because we all have a universal understanding. I know this is dangerous to say this kind of stuff, but a universal understanding of how shapes sound. So for example, if I said dong, 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 or zing, 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 probably all of you, at least most of you, hopefully agree that the second example, zing, 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 is better suited to the shape triangle than dong, 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 right? This is a universal understanding of how shapes literally sound. And you can do that with all shapes. So this is crucial when pairing sounds with visuals, right? Visual identity. Then we talked about colors. Now, colors are much more subjective. So for example, blue, you see here on the screen. It's universal, or our universal understanding of this is in water and nature. It's calming, perhaps, even serious or cold. But there is some kind of universality when it comes to sound. And when colors and sound are well matched together, it can really elevate the experience to a whole new level that visuals can't do alone. Simple exercise, a drone, a well-fitted drone to the color blue, but you see how blue kind of, or the sound exaggerates that color, right? Kind of like pairing a good cheese with wine or vice versa. So how do we fit all these things together that we went through in part 1 and 2 into an actual cohesive family of sounds? And that's what we're going to talk about today in part 3. So UI sounds, they're never heard in isolation by themselves. They're heard before or after other sounds, typically. So for example, you power on a portable speaker, there's a sound, you wait for your Bluetooth to be paired, there's a sound for that. And then finally, hopefully, they pair successfully and there's a short sound for that. That's just one example of a short user journey, right? But UI sounds, they have to be thought as that family of sounds rather than 3 individual sounds. So let's dive into how we actually make this family, this cute family on the screen here. How do we do that? So to start, you have to identify your parent functions in the family, from which all other parent sounds, parent functions, those words are interchangeable right now, but you have to identify your parent functions from which all other sounds will inherit. So these are typically, the parent functions are the larger sounds, the more signature moments like power on, power off, unboxing, whatever it might be, or wake in this case on your screen in front of you. So this will act as your anchor sound, your reference point sound, your master sound, so to say, for every other sound to follow, your DNA in some sense. The next sound in the user journey that you hear should pair nicely to that previous sound, right? So if you heard these one after another, they sound musical and they sound pleasant to listen to and work together like one, but they still communicate their individual meaning and function. So you see it starts to get more complex quickly with 2 sounds. Same thing to the next sound in the user journey. But you have to cover all possible user journeys. So if you were to hear, or in the case in front of you, you were to hear either a confirmation or an error in that user journey, you have to cover those possibilities, right? And make sure they sound musical, so on and so forth throughout the user journey. So in part 1, we talked about how functional sounds are a bit like fitting puzzle pieces together. And it's a bit the same when talking about UI sounds within user journeys. So rather than a puzzle pieces fitting together, even though you can take that analogy, it's also like forming a kind of train of sounds, musically fitting sounds. So if someone starts with power on and ends with power off 2 hours later, that at least was a musically pleasant journey, right? So this is just one example, and you can imagine this kind of tree forming of branches where all these possibilities come off, where users take a right turn here or a left turn here, so to say. So you have to really take that into account. So it gets complex quickly. This is why forming your core DNA, or finding that parent function and finding that core DNA of your brand, is so crucial, so that you can then spread that DNA over the other sounds and create a red thread throughout the user journey. Another thing to consider is creating forward motion. Look at that, very cool. So directing the user towards something, a certain function. So for example, directing the user towards completing a task, or if you want the user to go through a particular user journey, so to say, towards something. Sound is your best way to do that, or it's at least a great way of doing that. For example, take a press sound, just a simple press button. Then take a activate after, and finally a complete. So you can hear how those, let's just do it again. So you quickly learn that progression, right? You know where it's headed and where it's ending. This is a really simple example, of course, but it kind of teaches us patterns that users will remember over time and want to take again towards that final completion stage. So it's really powerful, right? It's kind of acting like a beginning, middle, and end. People, let's take another example. Same thing, different sound, bit of a wacky sound, playful sound there. But you get the idea, beginning, middle, end, going towards something. Cool. So now you have sounds that work within a user journey, but perhaps you'd like to create a more consistent brand experience, maybe across different products. So if you have product line with different products, you want to create a red thread between them so that they all don't sound different or look different, so on and so forth. It's common practice in design, but the same applies to sound. So say you have a range of appliances and you'd like to create a red thread through or between the products appliances. What you don't want is for the users to relearn every sound each time they interact with a new product in the same ecosystem. Right? That's not really ideal. You don't want them to relearn what the meaning is. So you want to create a red thread throughout the customer journey, so to say. And this would dramatically improve usability, but also increase brand loyalty, right? Because people know it works. Like with Apple, it's a classic example. People know it works. They know the sounds, they trust them. So therefore they know when they change to a different product in the same brand, it will work the same. Great. I'll stick with them. Brand trust, brand loyalty through the roof. Fantastic. So increasingly devices, they live in ecosystems now rather than single products or devices. And coherent UI sounds make it feel like you're actually interacting with one environment, not a bunch of unrelated gadgets. Hope that makes sense. So to create a red thread, you want to start by defining a shared vocabulary between these products. So for example, that confirmation sound you hear, if it's consistent across your products, say app, oven, fridge, smart speaker, the users don't have to relearn that each time. They instantly understand what it means, no matter which device it comes from. This is fantastic. It's really smart and sophisticated design. So this kind of creates a muscle memory for the ears in a way that the user starts to know what's happening before they consciously process it, right? They don't have to think. A little like with your QWERTY keyboard or your computer keyboard, you're typing, you're not thinking, or my name, John, I don't think J, O, or where's the H, and I'm not thinking, I'm just doing, there's a muscle memory there. And the same goes with ears, ear memory, or ear muscle memory, or muscle ear memory, or whatever we want to call it. Maybe you can type something in the comments. But the same is true for sound with this muscle memory. So if you achieve functional consistency across your product line, across products, or even within one product, it still applies. Users can avoid making mistakes. It's especially critical with high-stake appliances like medical devices, industrial tools, where UI sounds can actually prevent mistakes from happening, or injuries or accidents or something. Whereas on the other hand, inconsistent use of sounds can cause confusion and therefore perhaps make mistakes. That last one's very harsh, but I think it hones in the point here. Whereas using consistent sound design or the same error tone across products, there's less confusion. We understand it, less mistakes, therefore better UX. So inconsistent UI sounds, they kind of make it feel sloppy in a sense, right? The first example I played you, a bit like mismatched fonts. You know, if your font keeps changing, it's sloppy. Whereas when sounds are carefully designed to be consistent and live in the same sonic world, it signals premium product experience. Bit like that, right? Similar, consistent, and it's powerful. So a cohesive, well thought out soundscape, sound design communicates attention to detail, right? That they care. And that stylistic consistency, like you see on the screen now, I'm not a graphic designer, so it's not like a logo here, but you understand that there's kind of a perceived quality to it when it's consistent like that. And this really applies to sound design. Also, the more consistent sounds are, the more memorable. It's harder to remember the first sounds because they're all different, of course. And the second sounds are more consistent, so we remember it. Just like the way when you go to a train station and you hear the doors closing, it's always the same sound because, well, it's on purpose because we have to know what's happening. We have to subconsciously just act and react to those closing doors. It'd be a bit weird if they kept changing it every day. So a red thread throughout products, it creates flow. It creates seamless understanding, seamless style, and ultimately trust in the users. They trust the brand because users trust products that they know how it's going to behave. It's predictable. They know the sound that will come, therefore they trust it. So how do we build this cohesive language? How do we actually build a cohesive language? Well, just like in visual design, you define core categories first, and then you set some kind of shared design rules like colors, materials, finish, blue, what is the material, what is the finish. It's the same with sound. You just decide musical components like key signature, which is the set of pitches you use or tones, and the timbre palette, going earlier back to that, the point of timbre. Which instrument do you choose? Is it a synthesizer or is it a whatever it is, guitar? Is it spacious? Is it soft? Is it hard sounding? All these kinds of things. So you kind of think of it like a hierarchy of design rules that you have to follow, a design guide. You notice how I added sound to this this list here. I think it should be added to this list. Great, so you've designed a bunch of functional and hopefully stylish sounds. Fantastic, cohesive, hopefully. Now it's time to roll them out, right? Just get them out there. Great, we'll actually know. There's a few more steps after you design the sounds. So at Sonic Minds, at least how we do it, is we have a couple more steps before rolling them out. Sound shouldn't be designed in perfect studio environments. We shouldn't, even though we do this, even as visual designers, we design on 4K screens usually, or whatever it is, high quality screens. But it would be a bit silly if, and here's where the Nokia reference is coming, it would be a bit silly if you design sounds on a 4K screen. Oh no, sorry, you design your visual UI graphic elements on a 4K screen, knowing it's going to end up on a monochrome Nokia display. You wouldn't do that, right? You would probably design it for the Nokia. The same goes with sound, but it's not often done like that, but it very much applies. So you don't design sounds in a perfect studio environment with your big speakers, everything's fancy. You actually have to design for the speaker on the product and what limitations you have to be aware of. So that's where implementation comes in. And you want to start implementing really early in the design process as much as possible, because the earlier, the better. So rather than procrastinating and leaving all your problems to the end, which in the long run will cost you more time and money, I must say, but rather than leaving your problems to the end, you want to start to implement sounds early on in the design process, implement them on products, have a listen to them, and start that feedback loop of feedback. So the less issues, or there will be less issues going along if you do it like this. It's really highly recommended because UI sounds, they're only as effective as their implementation. You create awesome sounds, implement them crappily, it's going to sound crap, right? I know there's a saying or a metaphor for what I'm trying to say here, but I can't find it now. Maybe someone can write a metaphor for that. Squishing a sausage through something, I don't know. But okay, back on track. Say you designed a beautiful sound, fantastic sound, but when you implement it, it plays too soft out of an appliance or out of a portable speaker or a product or a phone if it's an app, or it plays too loudly or harshly or too often so that it's fatiguing for the user to listen to. That's where this implementing really comes in. So how do we implement? Well, one classic issue that arises with sound is speaker limitations. So what is the speaker that you have on your device? What kind of speakers are you working with? You need to design for those speakers so that those limitations are kind of baked in early on in the process. If it's not, or if you don't have the ability to kind of design on the product itself, then you mix afterwards. So you mix for the speaker afterwards and optimize the sound so that they sound good on the speaker in the end. So it's a bit different to how the visual realm works, I must say, because the way that screens seem to go these days is there's a pretty high standard, right? There's a high standard of display, especially with Apple and all the other kind of display screens we have. LED screens, physical materials, there's quite a high standard now. Whereas sound doesn't really have that standardization yet, but it is emerging, it's coming, it's getting better. So there's still a huge, what I mean is there's a huge difference in quality between speakers. There's a huge difference between, for example, this, I'm on a Mac now, MacBook. It sounds great. I actually sometimes listen to music out of these M2 speakers because it sounds pretty awesome. It's really impressive. It sounds like that way for relatively small speakers, right? But then you have, I don't know, a Bluetooth speaker, vastly different quality. Maybe it sounds crap, even though it's bigger than other devices, so on and so forth. So or your washing machine, that's a classic one that sounds crap, right? So there's a big difference that we have to take into account as sound designers, which is what we do. But the good thing is there's awareness about this because standards are getting higher due to quality conscious brands like Apple, right? They care about this stuff. So standards are rising, but you still have things like piezo speakers. For those who know they don't sound good. And for those who don't, I'll just make a sound with my mouth. It's the ones that, these are the speakers typically in appliances and small products that buzz and they go a bit like, you know, a bit like a bee or something, but really loud. Or your toaster when it's done might have this sound, or your fridge door open, when it's left open and it starts beeping, might have that sound, so on and so forth. So countless products actually have, you know, these speakers, yet they have fancy features, visual features like LED screens, but then a crappy speaker. So there's a disconnect there. But this disconnect, as I said, it's merging. Things are getting better slowly. And we have to help that, all of us. I mean, all of you in this call right now at least care somewhat, which is great. So we have to spread that word, right, to those who don't care as much about sound. They do care if they hear good sound. And that's a hint, is to show good sound, raise the bar, you know. Anyway, so back on track. What we need to do is get to know your limitations. Get to know what you're designing for. Hopefully it's not a piezo speaker. If it is, that's fine. We can design for that too. There's some incredible things that can do with that little buzzer sound, but nowhere near as good as polyphonic speakers. But get to know your limitations. And here's a kind of go-to list quickly for things to watch out for if you're designing products or involved with product design in whatever way, shape, or form. So typically, problems that arise are, yes, speaker quality. What kind of speaker? What is the quality of it? It's very cheap to upgrade your speaker to a better quality. Speaker placement is really crucial. So where is the speaker placed in the product? That changes a lot, even though it seems like it doesn't. If you put it next to a metal bracket or a piece of glass or something else, it'll dramatically change how the sound sounds, more than we think. I'm always shocked about this fact as well. Acoustic materials, what materials are used in the product? Is there anything done to help the amplification of sound? And then, of course, file size and format. Do you literally have to work in a certain kind of small file size and particular format of audio files? So there's just a go-to list. But if you really want to take UX to the next level, then you want to implement sounds in a context-aware manner. And what I mean by that is implement them in a way that adapts and responds to the context of the user and the product and where the product is. So much like, just to take an example we all know of, with visual devices, typically, a device will adjust to the surrounding light. So your brightness will adjust to the light through a light sensor, or your computer might adjust its coloration when it goes to nighttime, reduce the blue light. So good sound design actually does the same as this, just in sound. So adjusting to sonic environments or sonic surroundings. So let's try to be one step ahead, all of us, which could be awesome. So sound design, it's not static anymore. As I said, it's becoming context aware. It's reacting dynamically to things like the environment where the product is. Is it in a big room, small room, or is it in an important one? Is it in a noisy space? Is it in a workspace, what do you call it, a workshop or factory or something? Is it in a loud kitchen, or is it in a quiet space, a bedroom, or is it underwater? I don't know, wherever it is, but you have to be aware of that, or at least have some kind of way of being aware of that. Also, where is the user? User proximity. Is the user close to the product? Therefore, if they are close, you can maybe turn down the UI sounds. Does that make sense? Because they don't need to be so loud. I'm close to the product. Is the user far away from the product? Turn them up, make them more audible. Or likewise, in a noisy environment, going back to the first point here, if it's a really loud environment, loud kitchen, you want to turn the sounds up. Likewise, if it's at a quiet point of the day, turn them down. And then, of course, you might have guessed through the graphic on the screen here, time and situation. So night versus day, dark mode, you call it in visual. The same goes with sound. I get really agitated when the alarm goes off in the morning. Unfortunately, I have to use it, but it's annoying, right? It's super loud, it's very harsh. Imagine if that adapted to time of day. Or at nighttime, likewise, it did something else. Maybe it becomes jazz. I don't know, right? You think up the ideas. But it's context aware. So take the kitchen example. You need to be, or for sounds to adapt to the context, you actually need to know what the context is for a product. And I know all products can't do this. This is why we're talking about being a step ahead, or how to do implementation in the future, at least. It is happening though, but what you want to do is take in information, input from the outside. So take the kitchen, this nice kitchen you see in front of yourselves. It's not my kitchen, but I wish it was. But there's a lot of annoying sounds typically, like I said earlier, your fridge or your toaster, or when you leave something on top of the stove top and then it starts, beeping. It's a bit annoying, right? Everything's beeping. So good sound design, it kind of reacts to the room, the ambient noise accordingly. So if it is a quiet stage, it will react and turn down. But also, if you want people to buy into your brand of products, so say you want people to buy into your kitchen appliances in this case, you can actually create brand loyalty via using consistent sound design throughout the kitchen that complements each other or dances with each other in a sense. So this kind of creates a seamless user experience in the kitchen and really takes it to the next level, right? This is the level we're headed to. It even knows, context-aware sound design should know when you don't need to be interrupted, when to be quiet, when to use silence. Very important. And for audio-minded people, the parameters that you adjust, if you were to adjust sounds according to the environment, are things like loudness, obviously, is the go-to, EQ or frequency shaping to make things sound more audible, or high frequency, more treble. The length of the file to get more attention. Does it loop and loop and loop until you come over and shut it off? and the timbral variation. So again, what we talked about earlier with timbre, is it spacious, the sound, soft or harsh? So harsher to get your attention, but then it becomes softer when it doesn't need your attention as much. So on and so forth. Hope that all makes sense. Cool. So now you've implemented your sounds. Fantastic. This is when you have to ask yourself, it's kind of the final step here. Do the users understand the sounds? Do they even like the sounds? Do they also agree with you as the designer that they are stylish and premium, or is it just you thinking it? Well, that's where testing really comes in, is to answer all of these questions that you have. Because essentially, why test? Well, as designers, we make assumptions. Essentially, we go through weeks, sometimes months in the design process. Many decisions are made along the way by relatively small creative teams. And these decisions that are made along the way are essentially assumptions, right? But testing allows us to verify those assumptions. So it's a great way to kind of affirm that you haven't gone off on a tangent or down the wrong rabbit hole, which all of us have done before. At least I have. So you don't want to get tone deaf in a way, and testing can hold you to that, hold you to a more objective standpoint, or at least test that people are perceiving the sounds the same way as you assumed or intended. But we also test to ensure usability. So we call it functional association, but we test with people where they listen to the sound and then hear the sound by itself, no visual aid, even though you can do that. But if you were to just hear the sound, you've never heard it before. And then what kind of function do you think it would have? So if you heard a power on sound, say, and you just hear it, you've never heard it before. Do you think it's a power on, or do you think it's a power off sound? Or what function do you think it has? So we can test all that stuff to see, okay, hopefully people, when they heard the power on, without seeing anything, they actually thought, oh, this could be a power on, which is the end goal, right? For it to be extremely seamless and intuitive to understand sounds. That's the ultimate goal with UX sounds, UI sounds, is to be just intuitive. So this is super crucial in making it a smoother experience, right? Then we have attribute association testing, we always do. So that's where you kind of check if you're matching the brief you had. So for example, you wanted the sounds to be perceived as premium, or you wanted the sounds to be perceived as playful, or whatever kind of brand brief you had or brand attributes you have. You want to make sure that users are also perceiving the sounds in that same way, right? Emotionally kind of perceiving the sounds in the right way. Then you want to check, are they likable? Super basic. Do people like them? Are they pleasant? Are they not fatiguing over time? Very important. You also want to check about the context awareness we talked about just a moment ago. Do they work in different listening environments, the sound? So does the sound work where under the water, but then it also works up in the sky, and then it also works down on the ground, and then it also works in the kitchen and wherever, right? Does it work where you intend them to be played? Do they play at the right volume? Are there any latency issues? Which is very important with sound, is for there to be instant feedback, so you can hear the sound as soon as you interact with the product. Then we test for brand alignment, of course, very important to make sure the sounds align with your physical and visual identity, how it looks, feels, and also who the brand is, who they want to be, how are they positioned, all those kinds of stuff. Do people actually hear the sounds and say, yeah, I actually associate these sounds with this brand? That's what we test. And finally, if our assumptions have been verified, if people understand the sounds intuitively, if they're appealing to people emotionally, if they like them, if they're performing well technically, all these kinds of things, it results in what? Peace of mind. Peace of mind for us as the designers. We did our job well. The sounds are working as we intended, great. But also as creative, these test results are a great way to convince other, especially non-creatives, like stakeholders, so on and so forth, to convince them that, hey, look, what we did, it actually works. We have numbers to prove it. We've tested it. So very, very, very important testing. Cool. So now you can finally roll out the sounds. Fantastic. You've made functional sounds, emotional sounds. They're performing well. They work well in user journeys. They're cohesive with one another. They work as a family of sounds. You've implemented them. Great. They sound good. You've tested them. Fantastic. We're all convinced they work. But finally, I'd just like, and that was it actually. But finally, let's just talk about the future of sounds then. So with products now, increasingly they have fewer physical controls. Less buttons, less knobs, less whatever, right? Physical controls. They have more minimal displays typically. At least emerging technologies do. Sometimes even screenless now. A lot of products, perhaps invisible somewhat. Anyway, what I'm saying is that sound is actually becoming now the primary feedback channel, primary source of interactive feedback. So take earbuds, for example. These are my earbuds. No, they're not. But when users interact with these earbuds, they interact entirely through sound now. And this is happening more and more and more with products. It's kind of the future in a way. So with less buttons and physical controls, we're using things like long press and other ways of creating interactions, because we don't have 10 buttons now, we only have one place. So we have to use things like long press or multiple taps or secondary functions like that. So that's where sound actually comes in and takes over everything, because it says, how do you know if you've tapped it 4 times or if you've held it for the right amount of length or whatever, right? You don't know unless the sound says, yes, you did the right thing. You hear this small auditory feedback. So it's super crucial. And that's why sound design is getting better slowly, but it will get a lot better because there's a lot more need for it as well with emerging technologies. So UI sounds, they're moving from static beeps, the toaster, doop, 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 all these kinds of sounds that we know from the yesteryear, to more constant context-aware sounds, like we talked about. Sounds that create spatial experiences, sounds that, now we have advancements in spatial audio, 3D audio, binaural audio, haptics even. And sound will increasingly become the kind of way to guide interactions with products and create, meaningful interactions or meaningful moments, functional moments, but also emotionally impactful moments. And that's super cool, super powerful stuff. So yeah, sound design is getting better. It's getting smarter, more adaptive. It's going in the right direction. The good news is all of you being here in this call says to me that you already care, which is great. So yeah, it's great that you could be here, and I'm happy to have wrapped up this webinar series. I hope it's been great for all of you. We're going to kick off a Q&A. But yeah, let's move things forward. Cool.
Great. Thank you, John. Hope you all enjoyed that. I'm checking for questions. Actually, you haven't asked any questions. I'm not sure, maybe if we'll give you guys a minute if you have any. Maybe you just did such a great job, John, that everyone has all the information that they need. But of course, please, you're very welcome to ask questions here in the chat.
It's funny because last time we had way too many questions.
Yeah.
So.
Perhaps it's the new platform. Let's see.
Perhaps. Feel free to ask. Yeah, ask away. All questions are good.
Yes, Andre, please take it away. And thank you all for answering the polls. It's nice for us to see sort of for future webinars, what are people interested in, different formats, different topics, and so on. John, I liked your comment. Seems like we have a lot of experts here. That's great to know. Perhaps that's also why there's not many questions. Okay, here is one from Andre. Andreas, what about when clients don't yet see the need for sound UX in the products?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I had the perfect answer for you, but I'll do my best. I mean, it's just creating awareness. I think that's why I'm doing this webinar series, is to actually show the impact of sound when paired with brand and paired with visuals. So I would say, take stuff like this, educational things, even the webinar, share that. Maybe that will help. But any way that you can actually spark emotions in someone, I would say that's the core. So rather than telling someone, I hope I don't do this too much, but rather than telling someone it's impactful, show them, let them have the impact themselves in whatever way that might be. So yeah, convincing them, showing them the way that sound is moving into a better way. Because I think a lot of clients are scared off by the beeps and the boops and the bad sounds. So showing good sound design when it's done well, I would say that as an answer.
Great. We've got another question from Axon. Axon is asking, how do we treat sound design when there are no longer buttons or haptic triggers? When mainly most of these interactions are triggered by the user's voice? What are the parameters? Will it still be the same?
Sorry, I had it turned down there. I'm just reading. Yeah, it's a good question. It's mostly the same. I mean, with voice recognition and things like that, those technologies are developing rapidly. So the bridge between them, it will not be so different. It depends with people, because some people like to listen to someone talking to them all the time, say Siri, so on and so forth. But a lot of people don't actually, and would rather very small sounds of confirmation. So rather than hearing a voice confirm it all the time, like, yes, that was great, or sure thing, or whatever it is, right? I'm exaggerating here, but you just have a very short sound to say that has been confirmed. Also, sound design can be very satisfying and emotional, which voice doesn't really get. So I'm hoping that answers your question, but essentially it will be the same. The parameters will be the same, most of all. So I hope that answered it.
Great. Then we've got another question from Dirk, asking, do you have a software framework for verifying assumptions? How many people and what target groups do you have involved?
Yeah, it's a great question. So at Sonic Minds, we collaborate with people. That's a philosophy of ours. We collaborate with the experts. So we actually, even though we know about testing audio, we collaborate with the experts in the field. So testing partners. So that's a lucky thing that we have. So we don't have software framework in that sense. We test with real people still. We try to panel testing, because that's I know AI testing is moving quickly, but still what we've tried is panel testing is the best way to go. Test on small groups of people. How many people, you ask? Good question. Start with, get as many as you can. I mean, to be honest, 3 people is good, right? But I will say, once you hit 50, you start to get a really good representation of society as a whole. 250, boom, that's enough. Where does what was the last question? What target groups do you have involved? Try to get a diverse demographics, diverse group of people to represent your users. Of course, if you're targeting a certain kind of person, just go for that. But typically, people are targeting everyone with products, so just diversity. Yeah.
I'll also add, depending on the type of product, thinking about accessibility as well, right? If a section of your target group has a hearing difficulty or vision impairment or whatever it may be, right? You want to think about these things as well. Great. Then we have Marie. She's asking, or he or she is asking, what do you think about sounds for medical devices? How should they sound? Where does the future go?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Is a big field there's work going into it, but there's a lot of work to go into it, I must say. Everyone who's gone to hospitals or doctors, so on and so forth, there's that kind of fatiguing beeping of sounds. So there's a lot of work. Simple things can be done, I must say. So softening sounds so that they're not harsh. They don't just go, So the obvious things that like small actionable things we could already do, like making sounds softer, wow, or things like that. It's such a basic thing, but trust me, when it adds up, millions of sounds a day are heard, or thousands at least for one person heard in a hospital. Those small changes make a big difference to fatigue, which makes a big difference to performance of doctors and surgeons, so on and so forth. Where does the future go? Let's see. That's probably a whole webinar series in itself. But there's a lot to do, and I would say just starting with these small things is actually the future we have to target.
Great. Thank you for those questions. Dejit is asking, John, what's your favorite VST plugin? That's a hard question.
This is the hardest question of all. So I'll have to do a webinar series on that too. No, I'm joking. Okay, for the audio geeks out there, I'm a little annoying answering this question because I would say all of them do the same thing. So that's really annoying. Just get your Ableton, your Logic, your Pro Tools, whatever it is, and use stock plugins. They're fantastic. I'm a synth geek, so I love synths. I like old synths, but VST plugin, I don't know. Yeah, Ableton stock plugins, boom, fantastic. Operator,
Okay.
if you need a name.
There you have it. Karen is asking, where have you guys studied sound design, specifically regarding the branding angle? I'm currently studying at Sonic College and have previously studied aesthetic communications and experience economy. Wow. But would like to dive even further into the world of sonic branding, communication, sound logos, UI, UX, etc. Also, do you have any recommendations of books, podcasts, etc.? And want to know if you guys take on internships. Maybe I can answer that first because I actually went to Sonic College, so fellow alumni here. I would say, having gone there, it's a great place to learn, a little bit of everything. But there's not, just to be honest, there's not a whole lot of branding angle in it. There is some kind of call it like sono communication, which is thinking about sound from like more of a conceptual and a strategic angle. But I would really say you have to just try from experience, learn by doing. Definitely attend webinars like these. Read a lot of articles. There's a lot of really great stuff out there from test partners, companies like ours, who really come with a lot of research as well. So I think that's a good way to start. And then your next question, perhaps John, you can answer where you studied.
Yeah, so I studied. I actually studied as a tonomaster, so recording classical music and all the really, really niche, geeky stuff that goes into that. I also did a lot of work, masters and things like into spatial design, spatial sound design, and spatial audio, and so on and so forth. But I mean, I think like Anton said, it's not really relevant. A lot of it is just the experience that you can accumulate and try to learn, try to be open to things. Learn through doing is the best way. We can't study everything, unfortunately. I would love to have a degree in, I don't know, philosophy or something, but yeah, just learn by doing. And I think to the rest of your questions, Karen, they're fantastic. I would say reach out to me on LinkedIn or Anton or us, and we'll answer them there. Give you some references to books and podcasts, so on and so forth.
Great. Oh yeah, and we do take interns, Karen. You can just apply through our website if that's interesting. Andre has another question. When we're talking about sound brand awareness, isn't it important? Well, it just disappeared from me. Sorry. Isn't it important to frame the product sound with the branding goals in mind? Crafting the product sound user experience based on the brand sound identity.
Yes. You are spot on, Andre. This is exactly what we have to do. We have to start with brand insights. Who is the goal? Really high level. Sorry, not who is the goal. Who is the brand? What are their goals? And really high level thinking. Where are they trying to head? Who are they? How do they want to position themselves? All that kind of stuff we take into account. I tapped on it throughout the part 1 and part 2 a little bit in this series. Probably part 2, I would say, if you want to watch there. A little more, but yeah, I mean, what we do at Sonic Minds is we create sonic identities at the core, which are a representation of the brand and where they want to go. So yes, we just pull from that sonic identity and kind of pull away and form small UX sounds from that, but it all comes from, it's not ad hoc, it comes from a core DNA.
Great. And then I think we have room for one more question. This one's from Axon. Based on your experience, what is the key factor that made clients choose sound design rather than musical elements such as chords or melodies?
Yeah, it's a good question. So sounds, just for others, sounds typically now are more sound designed. So they, rather than a classic dum do 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 dum, melody, they're a bit more or Netflix, or something, right? Rhythmic and cool and sound design. I think that's just moving away from what jingles were. I think brands always want to innovate, right? And the easiest way to innovate is just move away from what someone was doing yesterday. So people moved into the sound design realm. Where we're going to go after this, very interesting. I would argue a combination of both. Maybe we go back towards melodies and chords. That's up for debate. But yeah, it's just how things innovate, move to cooler sounds. Film and game sound had a huge effect on this. So people want to hear cool sound designs that are similar to like the ones that they hear in, the cinema on the Dolby Atmos system, so that's a huge effect, and lots of things accumulate to make that change. But let's see where it goes. Good question.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Hope you all enjoyed this.
Fantastic.
Yes, please get in touch with us. Connect with John, connect with me, follow Sonic Minds across LinkedIn, Instagram. I think we're on TikTok, X, we're everywhere. So
there's also a QR code, if you didn't see it, directly to my LinkedIn account. So just hit me up. I love to chat about this stuff. And thanks everyone for coming today.
Yes, thank you all. Take care.